Hi, my name is Jacob, and I'm a park ranger at the Jimmy Carter National Historical Park in Plains, Georgia. I'm here to tell you a little bit about President Jimmy Carter. He was an entrepreneur from a young age, and that experience shaped President Carter and his policies that he even advocated for in the White House. Now, our park is in Plains, Georgia. That's where President Carter went to school and where he still lives today. Actually, President Carter lives in our park. Jimmy Carter went to school in Plains, but as a kid, his house was in the nearby smaller village of Archery, Georgia. And the Carter family was only one of two white families in the entire village of Archery. So President Carter, he grew up around an African American community from the age of 4 when his family moved there. President Carter also grew up around successful entrepreneurs like his father, Earl Carter, who employed about 2 dozen families to work on the farm. He operated a general store, he ran a dairy and a syrup business. He even rented out houses to most of his workers, and he helped run the local telephone and electric company. Now let's hear about Jimmy Carter's experience as a businessman from President Carter himself.
Well, I had a job from the time I was old enough to work in the field. My first job on the farm was carrying water to the other workers in the field who were chopping cotton or picking peanuts or doing things like that. And I would go to the nearby spring. It bubbled up out of the ground then, a lot of them. And I would get a bucket of water and carry it to the field, and the workers there would drink water, and I'd go back and get some more. It was a very difficult job. When I got to be about 5 or 6 years old, my daddy let me have peanuts out of his field, beginning in, I'd say, early July, when school was out. And I would go into the field every afternoon, pull up peanuts out of the ground where they grow, and take them back to our house in a little red wagon that I pulled, and pick the peanuts off the vine and wash them good and put them in salt water. And the next morning I'd get up about 4 o'clock in the morning and boil my peanuts and with salt, and then put them in little paper bags, half a pound each, about 20 of them on an average, and I would walk down the railroad track about 2 miles to Plains, and I would sell 20 bags of peanuts, usually before dinner time, lunchtime. And that gave me an income of $1 a day because the peanuts were 5 cents a bag, 20 of them. And I was making as much income as the average full-grown adult that worked in the fields for $1 a day, from before daybreak until after sundown. So I had a fairly good income as a little child. And it was hard work, and when I got back home, I would eat dinner with my family, lunch, and then I would go out in the fields in the afternoon and start the process all over again. On Saturdays, I would do about twice as many, about 40 bags of peanuts, and because I worked all day downtown selling my product. And so I had a good job. Later, when I got to be, I'd say, high school age, I formed a partnership with my first cousin, Hugh Carter, in the old bank building, which is now a restaurant in Plains. And we would sell ice cream and hamburgers. 3 dips of ice cream for a nickel, 5 cents, and a big hamburger for 5 cents. And I would also then put my peanuts on the counter, and I'd sell peanuts along with the hamburgers and ice cream. So I was a business person, you might say, beginning when I was 5 or 6 years old, all the way up until I went off to college. I'm standing in my daddy's store, which we call a commissary. Daddy had the same stock of goods in Plains back in 1928, but he moved it out here. And we had in the store just the basic things that people needed. In those days, in the Great Depression, there was not any money much. And people traded in eggs and pigs and chickens and things like that. Most of the food then was very cheap. A big loaf of bread was 5 cents. Eggs were about 1 cent each. We sold cheese and butter and meat that my daddy cured. We sold overalls that cost about $1.50 then. A pair of shoes, cheap shoes, cost $1. The best shoes cost $3. They were Wolverines, I remember that. And this was where people came to buy their basic necessities that they had to have: meal, flour, sugar, salt, and things like that. This was a time, too, when people had to work hard to make a living. A grown man was paid $1 a day for going to work before sunrise, before daybreak, as a matter of fact, working until sundown. And an able-bodied woman working by the day would get 75 cents for the same time. a strong young teenage boy that couldn't take care of mules well and horses got 75 cents a day. But that went a long way with the cheap prices that we had then. This store was open full-time just on Saturday afternoons, but whenever anybody wanted to buy anything in between time, even if it was a 5-cent bottle of castor oil, we'd have to come out here with the keys, unlock the store, sell them the castor oil, make out a ticket because it wouldn't pay until Saturday afternoon, and then lock the store back and go back to the house. It was a constant nuisance for children because Daddy always threw me the keys whenever anybody came during mealtime to make a purchase. This was kind of the center of life on Saturdays because this is where my father paid the workers who had been putting in hard labor on the farm, and it was where they paid their accounts and where we settled up with each other. The store was a good place, and it kind of exemplifies or demonstrates a life during the Great Depression years, a life of no money, but a good life of companionship and mutual care and love. My daddy had a farm supply business before I came home from the Navy in 1953, and I took over that small business of buying peanuts and so forth and expanded it over time. My mother was a partner with me, and my youngest brother Billy was a partner when he came back home from the U.S. Marines. And so we sold fertilizer and seed for planting and feed for livestock and insecticides to control the insects in the fields. And then in the harvest time, we bought peanuts from the farmers and corn, whatever they had for a surplus. A little bit later on, after a few years, I built a cotton gin. So we ginned farmers' cotton, and I had storage warehouses to put the cotton in. So we bought and sold peanuts and cotton on a very large scale, and dealt with about I'd say 200 farmers in supplying their needs for what they planted in the spring, the fertilizer and so forth, and how they grew their crops. So I would quite often sell all of that material for the farmers to plant on credit, and then they would pay me by bringing me their crops when they harvested in the fall, bringing in the cotton and peanuts.
Now, what the videos didn't tell you was that when he was around middle school age, President Carter bought up some cotton when the price was low, and he sold it when the price came back up. He then used that money he earned from selling the cotton to buy houses that he then rented out to farm workers. So as you can see, President Carter was working hard as a farmer, a salesman, a concession stand operator, a store clerk, an investor, and a landlord, all before he graduated from high school, and all during the Great Depression. Jimmy Carter is most well known for being a peanut farmer. He made the decision to give up his dream job in the Navy, and he moved back to Plains to be a peanut farmer because he wanted to be like his dad and have an impact on the local community as a businessman. Moving back to become a farmer was hard. Jimmy Carter only made $300 his first year peanut farming, and the Carters had to live in cheap government housing. Although he made more money in future years, Jimmy Carter faced a difficult decision. As the federal government began standing up for equality for black people, many people who were white in Plains began joining clubs and wanted to keep black and white people separate. Jimmy Carter had a choice to make. Should he do the right thing by saying no to those who wanted to keep things unequal, and then they would try to bully him out of business? Or should he join those who wanted to keep things unequal so he could stay popular and keep his business? Before I tell you which option Jimmy Carter chose, think about what you would do if you were Jimmy Carter. I think it's easy to say, of course I'd do the right thing and I'd stand up to say that everyone was equal. But how easy would that be if it meant having no money? How easy would it be if it meant losing your friends? How easy would it be if your teachers would give you bad grades? You would be alone, you would have no money, and no one would want to help you. Doing the right thing is often not the easy thing. Well, even though it was hard, Jimmy Carter did the right thing. He risked his business to stand up for those who had less power. That's called integrity. He even flushed $20 down the toilet when a friend asked if he wasn't joining because he didn't have enough money to pay the club's membership fee. And Jimmy Carter carried that moral integrity and hard work and frugality into the governorship and the presidency. His influences as a child led President Carter to hate wasting things and to reject the idea that it's okay to hate people. During his first speech as governor of Georgia in 1971, he bluntly said the time for racial discrimination is over, even though it turned former supporters into enemies. He also wanted to save the state government money by shrinking the number of state agencies from 285 down to 20. He required the state government to make a new budget every year, and he took trips around the world to convince international businesses to invest in Georgia. He continued many of these policies at the national level as president in 1977. Early in his presidency, he called for energy efficiency to reduce waste. He wanted to invest in renewable energy, like the solar panels that he installed on the White House roof. He made car manufacturers make the engines in their cars use less gasoline. He even asked average people to turn down their home's heat in the winter and wear a sweater instead in order to save energy. Many of these policies and his push for government reform that works well led President Carter to establish the Department of Energy. It's the national agency that oversees and makes rules for how we make and use energy. President Carter also created inspectors' offices in the government to investigate waste in every corner of the government. The lessons that President Carter learned as a child entrepreneur instilled the values that he carried into the White House. Even at an early age, Jimmy Carter embraced the idea that all people are equal, regardless of the color of their skin. Even with the threat of losing his business and his friends, he had the integrity to stand up for the idea that the businessman and the politician should treat people equally. He also used his entrepreneurial problem-solving skills to address one of the country's biggest challenges during his time in office. That was the energy crisis. He asked Americans to be responsible in using less energy and for the energy industry to find new ways to make more energy. All of this took hard work, determination, and moral integrity to see it through. And that's the rich entrepreneurial legacy of President Jimmy Carter.